welcome to The Public Good. This is Dejia James with Partnership for the Public Good, uniting over 280 organizations to make a better Buffalo Niagara region. And I'm excited today to bring you this special Election Day episode, and I'm really excited to have local members of the Buffalo Democratic Socialist of America chapter to talk about the current political landscape of America and maybe a little bit about Buffalo. We're getting a new mayor. You know, some people are excited, some people aren't that excited, feel like it's the status quo. We can get into our opinions about that. But I want to lay a little bit of groundwork on the episode because I wanted to talk specifically with local DSA members because of the moment that democratic socialism is having on the national stage. Some of you may have seen Zohran Mamdani's campaign for New York City mayor and the popularity he has been able to gain and garner on social media platforms specifically, and what kind of a new age, new generation political campaign can look like, but also for representing a new political way of thinking, political thought. I know the local chapter says they aren't a party, so I want to get into the specifics of that, so people can kind of say, well, what do you mean? Are you your own party? Are you not? Zohran Mamdani is running on the Democratic ticket, so it's really important for us to understand what the differences are there. But there's a lot of chatter on democratic socialism in America specifically because some feel the counter argument is that it's a threat to American democracy, whatever that can be a dog whistle for. And I pulled from the national website of DSA that in 2024, they started a program called Workers Deserve More, where they hope to bring together millions of people throughout the U.S. to fight for a true democracy where working people have control over their own lives, their government, and the economy. And I thought that was just a great summation of kind of the ideology behind democratic socialism. But I want to talk to some democratic socialists. So I'm so excited that I have you two here today on the podcast, and I'll just have you introduce yourselves, where you're from, to the folks.
Hi, my name is Alok Pinto. I am an at-large member of the steering of Buffalo DSA, and I also co-chair our electoral committee and our infrastructure committee, and I've been on the podcast before discussing some infrastructure stuff that we're doing in the city.
Hi, my name is Taylor. I am the co-chair of the electoral committee alongside Alok, as well as a steering committee member in Buffalo DSA. I've been a member since late 2019 or so I've seen the chapter go through many different evolutions, iterations, and super happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me. I just want to start with a basic question I think some people are curious about. You know, some people are still Democrats or registered Republicans, especially because we do have close primaries in New York State. People feel like they have to choose one or the other so they can be able to participate. What made you guys, start to organize or join a different type of political group or ideology? I know when I was growing up, it was like you have to be a Democrat, right? What made you finally kind of open your mind and decide, no, I think I want to do something differently?
Yeah. So for me, and I think Alok and I have different stories, but have definitely coalesced here. I specifically, I was politically active a little bit in college, but nothing too serious. I remember always kind of feeling this moment in this little thing in the back of my head that I'm like, something is still missing with liberal politics. Something is missing from the day-to-day that this party that I'm part of that, has some aspects of what I believe in isn't fully answering all of the questions of how do we meet people's needs? How do people feel safe, fed, housed, comfortable, all of these different things. And as time went on and as I got older, that some of those questions became more and more disillusionment, especially after the 2016 election, after particularly seeing the way Bernie Sanders was sort of shooed away from the national conversation. And I felt that there had to be something better. There had to be something that was a little bit stronger than, I am still trying to make the Democratic Party make sense for me. If there are other political alternatives. And as we'll talk about, DSA as a party or a party surrogate is always a topic of debate. But for me, even though DSA is legally, financially not a party, I have seen in the past couple of years it start to act like one. And I think that that's been a really important part of my development. It's why I started to join DSA, that, this organization is going a little step farther. They're saying liberal politics aren't enough. What can we do more? And then my political evolution has grown, and especially seeing it now take a more partyist, quote unquote, approach and start to act like a party has been a really inspiring part of why I'm still involved, even after 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, it's like joining the beginning of a new movement. It's so exciting to be a part of something before it kind of, who knows what the future evolution of it is, but like you're a part of that change making. So that's exciting. Yeah, Alok, what about you?
I think I was similar to you in a lot of ways. I grew up in an immigrant household. I came to this country when I was 3 years old. So we were always kind of, you have to be a Democrat, right? But, when you come to this country with nothing, our family was very lucky. We were very, successful in our immigrant story, but so many of us weren't, right? And my dad would always say, remember where you came from, remember how hard and how lucky we actually had to be to do this. So I've always seen kind of these cracks in capitalism, how hard it is to get ahead if you're at the very bottom, right? So I've always been kind of an anti-capitalist, but when I was growing up, there was no political home for anti-capitalists. The first election I could vote in was Bush v. Gore in 2000, which we all saw how disastrous that ended up being. So I spent most of my, 20s, early 30s, trying to pull the Democratic Party to the left. I was a Democrat who worked on Democratic campaigns. I volunteered in every presidential campaign up till 2012. I worked for Obama in 2008. And after a while, it just wasn't enough. I saw, I guess during the Occupy Wall Street movement, that Democrats weren't going to abandon the capitalist roots that kind of dominate both parties. For me, that made me actually very politically apathetic for a few years. And then Donald Trump was elected, but I really only became a socialist, formally a socialist. I'd say my politics were pretty socialist my whole life after India Walton's mayoral run in 2020, or 2021 rather. And I joined the chapter after that because I kind of had the opposite reaction after she lost in the general election. I'm like, no, we need to do better. We need to get going and actually get some people who care about this city in office, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you kind of pointed to some of what the national website says, where it's this choice between a far right and a corporate Democrat, which I think kind of signals a Democrat that's still pledges allegiance very much to a capitalist system that's exploitative, that really isn't going to solve all of our problems. And so I guess for me, Taylor, as you brought up the difference between, what you wanted to see from liberalism, quote unquote, which I think during Obama era we seemed to be kind of excited about and we had hope in and all of that, right? Hope with the poster and the colors. From that to then he got in there and it's okay, well, what's tangibly changing? What are we doing here, right? So for people that may not know the difference or are scared of socialism, that seems radical. For you, what's the biggest difference in why you leaned more towards socialism, a little bit more left, and what liberalism, is to you? Because some people I think still believe in liberalism in a way that they feel they are left, but it's more center, I think.
Yeah. I think for me, the way I try to make these distinctions between liberalism and even some like progressive parts of the Democratic Party are that anti-capitalism and socialism address the root cause of so many different types of oppression. The anti-capitalism hits at the root of, sexism, of anti-trans bigotry, of anti of any sort of bigotry that you can think of, racism, and so many other forms of oppression that we see in specifically the American context that we can always and should obviously fight on every front that is in front of us. See every challenge as an injury to one as an injury to all. So, our struggles are always interconnected. And I think that that's a really important thing and a helpful thing that has brought the progressive left, really reasonably together socially. But what we need is an additional foundational element to our analysis, which is class analysis, which is to say, all of us have more in common that we could be unhoused and, searching for our next meal, not knowing what our financial situation looks like. We're all more likely to be exploited in our workplaces, exploited by landlords, exploited by a lot of these other ruling forces than we are to ever becoming billionaires. So I think that that's a key driver of when I'm explaining to people where that line is and where socialism goes farther. It's that we understand all of these other horrific forms of oppression that are allowed to just run rampant, especially now in a right-wing controlled American society, as results of the ruling class saying we need to pick at different divisions. We need to keep people pitted against each other. We need people to feel so individual and so alone that it is them against this other group. It's you against immigrants. It's you against a trans person. It's you against, the people who have a book club that's reading a liberal book or something like that. Right. We are only in progressivism and liberalism. You're only really like putting Band-Aids on solutions. Where Alok and I think I can say that for both of us, believe that socialism and class analysis helps us understand these other forms of oppression and fight them on every front.
And what I'd say is, there are different theories about this in DSA, but personally I believe that you kind of touched on it earlier. There's been this, fear-mongering about socialism as against American democracy. To me, socialism is the most democratic system of governance. What we've seen is that the Democratic Party has been, co-opted by corporate interests. Billionaires have a say. Unfortunately, foreign lobbies like Israel have a say. And when you have this aspiration in America to have a government for the people, by the people, of the people, that's what, we would like to live up to. That working class people have a say over the issues that affect their lives. It's not enough to, have a healthcare plan that's tied to your employment, because that's, for example, another form of control over a person, where a corporation has like this guillotine over your head, right? If you're unemployed, you don't get healthcare anymore. That should be a fundamental right? So everyone needs healthcare, everyone needs housing, that sort of thing. So I think when people can control their own government, it is the most democratic it can be. And unfortunately, I do think the Democrats have strayed from that. Obviously, the Republicans have been very pro-capitalism for as long as any of us have been alive. So,
Right. And I guess like my thoughts while you guys are saying this is, and you know, I think like I just think back to the most recent past election and like how we're here now, how we have a right wing run America, and how I feel like people were tricked into feeling like their best interest is aligning with the billionaire class, and how we keep falling into that trap of, and I don't know if it's still just that this American dream of thing of, oh, I could be a billionaire one day. That's the whole point of America. We want to preserve that because I could possibly have a piece. This like 0.00001% chance that people hold on to in their heads. Like I don't know if that's what's keeping people to like voting against their best interest or not. And I don't know like what you all's feeling is, but I think then people fear because of propaganda the alternative is not socialism, but like oligarchical communism, right? Like these fear mongering, it's going to be like Russia, it's going to be like whatever, right? China or whatever people are scared of, right?
I think for me, when I hear things like that, and I think you'll find often even in socialist and communist circles that people will have these debates of, you know, where did our forefathers and our predecessors go wrong? What did they do right? Those are always lingering debates because we're where we are now and we're not in a socialist government. I think, you know, when I hear these like questions of like, oh, things will end up like X country or Y country, or we're going to end up with the breadlines, I would point simply to, we are looking at scarcity crises. We are looking at, you know, grocery prices that still haven't gone down, inflation that continues to, you know, run rampant on our wallets and our and makes it even harder and harder to live comfortably. That the wealth gap is increasing, and so when I hear people say, "Oh, I'm nervous about the breadlines. I'm nervous about, you know, this, that, or the other thing," I think of, and especially when people say like, "Oh, I'm so scared of like state repression. I'm afraid of the restriction of free speech." These things are happening now under capitalism. These things are happening in arguably the ultimate expression of a capitalist government in the United States. And I mean, even if you look at the foundation of the United States of America in the Constitution, obviously there's like a Bill of Rights that has made things that is a supplement to ensure that we do have rights. But the founding document didn't. So like the United States is like the ultimate form of capitalism, and we're seeing that realized. So when I hear fears of, you know, oh, what's going to happen during this, and this, I empathize with those concerns. I think, you know, all of us have had them at one point or the other, especially growing up and being educated in America. For the most part, like, I think that is just something that I tell people is like all of those fears of authoritarianism are happening right now. And all of those fears are happening right now. So, you know, we need an alternative because this isn't sustainable. And that's what I just think of when I hear those common arguments.
Yeah. I mean, Alok, do you feel like that kind of propaganda or like counter narrative to socialism and actually getting people organized with each other, the worker class and things like that, why do you, I mean, it could be past failures of certain iterations, I guess, of those systems. But to me, it's like those movements started with the idea of we're organizing the worker class, we're going to be about this or that. But then it turned into some individual white dude who was like, no, I want to do it this way, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's other reasons. And I mean, obviously there's other examples of non-white dudes, Castro's, whatever, like, you know, debatable. But like, I think that, you know, what do you think people's fears are in terms of like wanting to organize in this way? Or is it just like people who really do feel it's anti-American inherently?
You know, I think people are afraid of like losing something of their own, I guess. But, you know, I think most of us have been raised, at least in the Western religions, to, love thy neighbor, look out for the poor, look out for the stranger, these types of things. We have these moral codes, and they outright don't align with American capitalism. And I think people look at the situation and say, oh, well, if I have to pay more taxes, I can't, I'll have less money in my pocket. And what they don't realize is that, like, with robust services, if healthcare is a right guaranteed by the government, for example, if your landlord can't kick you out of your house for nothing, you actually save money on these things. We have a pretty low standard of living in comparison to other Western democracies. And I do think a lot of it is just propaganda. I mean, the Cold War has been over for 30 years, but it's certainly something I grew up with in the 90s, right? Like hearing, oh, we finally defeated the evil communists, right? I still think that lingers, especially in our parents' and grandparents' generation. I think it lingers in immigrant and communities of color. And it's really on us as organizers just to say, hey, it can still be a democratic process and look out and still serve the needs of everyone, right? And that's, we call it democratic socialism for a reason, right? There is a democratic element to it. And, there are some differing theories on what that looks like in its ultimate form. There are communists who think of socialism as kind of an intermediate step towards communism. But certainly, I think what we are looking for is certainly more democratic, less authoritarian than what we have under capitalism, where we've almost created a kleptocracy where the elite can just steal what they want and step on the necks of, the working class to get what they want.
Yeah, and to your point of like what the iterations look like, I think for some left Democrats that are still holding on, they still believe in, we can utilize capitalism. We just need more like welfare programs. It just needs to, the funding and the money we, capitalize on just needs to be used the right way, quote unquote, right? But then, I think ironically, even though I feel like the right counter argument is like, oh, welfare state, right? And they often like accuse Democrats of that sometimes. And yeah, they like, New York State, California, some states that are democratically run have a little bit more welfare programs than others. But I wouldn't quite like say they're a welfare like state, right? And I think there's a negative connotation with welfare, the word in general, like after the Reagan administration, welfare queen, all of those negative things that happen. So for you all as socialists, as democratic socialists, what does welfare like truly mean? Like what does, universal health care or other services and benefits look like for people that kind of like don't understand it? Would it look like food stamps as it is now? Would it look like Obamacare, as people, or is, some people think that was a complete failure, but what does that look like for people that don't know? What is a true like welfare society?
Well, for me, it's removing the profit motive out of things that are fundamental, right? And it means removing means testing, all the hoops that people have to jump through to get benefits, right? When you talk about Obamacare, when you create an exchange of private healthcare insurances, that have to create this plan, they're still creating this system where these companies whose motivation is to make money are slowly going to try and raise prices under what's allowable under the ACA. And we're seeing now, what is it now, 15 years later, that healthcare is becoming unaffordable again, right? Whereas if there is a government single-payer system at the point of service, if your doctor says you need this test, you get the test, and it's paid for by the government. They can set prices, they can control the costs, and they can do it without regard to profit, right? Because the government doesn't need to turn a profit, so to speak. It needs to be fiscally solvent, but it doesn't need to pay the CEO millions of dollars, right? So for me, when we talk about welfare, it's more about it being universal, more about it being government controlled. We have this debate in the housing sector all the time. There are people, everyone agrees, liberals and leftists and socialists, we need to build more housing. Where we differ is how we do it. A lot of liberals want to remove the guardrails and regulations that slow down building. They complain about unions having too much power to negotiate things and drive up costs. But what we see in other countries with strong union support, like France, for example, they build much faster than us. And it's because the government itself is a developer. The government itself is building housing. They have leverage with the unions. They can negotiate without concern for profit, and they can build housing. Zohran said it in the primary debate. What slows down housing in the U.S. is that we're paying consultants $3 million to design a trash can. And that's what drives costs up in housing. So if the government can do it, especially in these fundamental areas of like housing and healthcare, that's what I see as a welfare state that serves like a socialist purpose.
And I think a lot of times, the common question we get when we talk about universal healthcare, when we talk about building better housing and all these sorts of things, the question is always, how do people pay for that? How are we paying for that? It is paid through our taxes. Our taxes currently disproportionately are being spent on war crimes, on genocide, on foreign intervention, and for example, I think about this quote unquote Department of War that exists now, where instead of, a State Department, you have a department that is solely looking to spend tax dollars and public money on interventions across the world. So, when we think about actually socialist or communist states that have hung on even till today, regardless of our critiques of those regimes or those governments, they're oftentimes interfered with by the United States. So when, a country is a socialist state, but still does have rampant inequality and struggles, a lot of times when you do the homework, you find that that intervention, that there was some sort of intervention by the United States to ensure that a socialist country can't succeed. So, I think about that, and I think about where our tax dollars go disproportionately now. Obviously, we know state and local taxes often disproportionately fund, police, the militarization of police, rather than any programs that would support police, increasing de-escalation trainings, increasing community programs that would address the root causes of crime. So, when you think about where our tax dollars are going for in the United States instead of these fundamental universal programs that we could have, it's pretty jarring to think about how, quote unquote, how we pay for it and what a welfare state could be when those are just simply things that a government should provide. Something I always say is like, I'm not necessarily anti-government. I'm anti the way this government administers things. So oftentimes, you know, I understand the sentiment of like, I hate the government, I'm mad at the government. Like, yes. But, you know, we are largely not mad at government as a concept. We just want it employed better. And our tax dollars to go toward essential care, toward housing, toward making sure that people's needs are met. And that, you know, if there's another government shutdown and there are more cuts, there are more this, that, and the other thing, those things wouldn't happen in a democratic, worker-led, and when I say worker, it's like, you know, folks who can't work, they are included in this movement. Anyone who is part of our society and functions in our society and is not a billionaire, you know, the 1% versus the 99% is a real thing that the rest of us, those of us who aren't in the ruling class, are part of the working class and need to think of ourselves that way and think of how our taxes are spent and think of how, you know, we operate and how things could be better. So that's what I think of for a welfare state, especially when people say, like, have those critiques and those arguments. It's like, really, it's not frustrating to me because I hear it all the time. I'm used to it, but it's one of those things where it's like, we have to understand just like shifting our mindsets and shifting how we talk about basic services and basic things that a government should do. So.
Absolutely. And to your point, like, you know, they have the money, it's going somewhere. It's just, where is it being allocated? Where are we focusing? You know, and some people love that we're an imperialist nation, but I think a lot of people don't. I think even, you know, on the right, people have said, why are we giving, you know, when the Ukraine war is at its height, obviously it's still going on, and we were sending all that money, and they're like, why are we have issues here right now. Trump is sending a lot of aid and helping the economy of Argentina, and some farmers, especially soybean farmers, I was just listening to like the Daily, the Washington Post, something, I don't remember which one, but they were talking to some farmers, and they're like, he's giving money directly to our agricultural competition. The second largest producer of soybeans after the United States is Argentina. And so they're like, and you already cut our subsidies, and the government's frozen, and I can't get my soybeans, I don't have my stuff. What's going on? Why are you sending money to Argentina? Why isn't it coming to us for agricultural support, right? So how that money's being spent. And then I think Alok had jogged this thought of mine, and maybe you too, Taylor, of how is the government administering funds? Because there's so much partnerships, to your point of Obamacare, where it's like, we're going to like partner with these like private interests, like capitalist businesses to uphold our healthcare system, right? And it's like, well, how well is that going to go? You know, at the end of the day, I think about like who runs our prisons, how our prison systems run, like how much private equity and companies are utilized in administrative services, even down to we have a plank on the agenda that's being pitched this year that's talking about the family health aid system, where you can like have a family member be your health aide if you'd like, and they changed that system where you can no longer self-select family member, but you have to, Governor Hochul signed this multi-year billion-dollar contract with this private health aid company, and gave them all the money up front. And now people are like short health aides. They can't choose their own. If they have a bad one, the customer service is terrible. And it's like she sold off, gave our tax dollars to uphold, you know, home health aid systems in New York State. But it was given to this private company with like no, you know, really verifiable trust or data to suggest that they would be successful in doing so. So I think it's interesting to me, like, for a government to kind of like self-fund and be self-sustained in developing housing, in providing health care and health services, rather than just outsourcing and making these like contracts or other agreements with private interests. And I think that's when, to your point, like a bunch of corporate interests then come into play, because then they have this contract with New York State, and then they have this and that. And I've seen that play out too when we're going and we're like talking about, like you all, the New York Health Act or something like that. But then they just signed this big contract with such and such company who sends a bunch of lobbyists for $1 million to say, no, we don't want that, don't do that, kill that. And then they do, you know? So then like that's when private interests come into play. So I'm off of that soapbox for now. Sorry. I want to talk about the current moment of democratic socialism. Alok, you brought up Zohran Mamdani and how he's been able to bring those practical talking points that I think no sane human being would disagree with, like on its face. You know, yeah, we're paying a consultant millions of dollars to design a trash can, like build the freaking house, build the apartment building, right? How have you both felt this year with this moment of a democratic socialist self-identified being on kind of the main stage?
Well, I think this year, a lot of people are finally starting to see the weakness of the Democratic Party because it is beholden to these capitalist interests. I think when you have a fascist government in place, certainly a government that aspires to fascism, at the very least, you need an opposition that's going to stand for the people and not still be concerned about, oh, well, how can we still be profitable? I think the movement in democratic politics in the last 30, 40 years, ever since Bill Clinton's triangulation policy, has been to, kind of tack to the center and try and win all these votes of these mythical moderates who are, socially left but fiscally conservative. And I think it's just failed utterly. They're so afraid of alienating people that they aren't willing to stand up to an administration that's violating all our rights. And one thing I always say is, why would they ever vote for a Republican light when they can vote for a Republican, right? You need to offer a clear alternative to what they are. And the Democratic Party, it's never been the best, but certainly in the 80s and before that, clearly had a liberal wing that kind of opposed those kind of things. I think at this juncture, people are angry that our leaders can't stand up for us. And they have a lot of different reasons why, but at the end of the day, I think it's because they're beholden to their donors, and their donors are billionaires, corporations, the people who fund these billion-dollar campaigns for 2 years at a time. And that's all they care about, holding on to their power. So,
yeah, and I think to the point of like what this moment means for democratic socialists, for leftists, even for progressives who are beginning to challenge their politics a little bit, I think it's a really exciting moment to see not just Zohran Mamdani, but other socialist candidates in other cities, in other parts of the country, up and down the ballot. There are so many different legislative candidates, even down to like town council candidates in certain other places that DSA has supported, which is so exciting because, the organization has been working really hard for so many years to build up a strong electoral program, and not just a strong one, but a strategic one, where not only are we running people with great politics who we think can win, but we're also finding candidates who, have done work in their chapters, who have begun their organizing with DSA and are known entities, accountable entities to DSA, and see the organization as a mutual partner and as a representative of working class interests of, you know, if an elected is like, hey, I'm thinking about X, Y, or Z thing, or X, Y, and Z or Z piece of legislation, they know that they can talk with, you know, their respective DSA chapter and hear the pulse on that, because DSA represents the working class. We aspire to be, you know, the political home for so many people who have been disaffected or have been, you know, struggling to find their way on the left or find an organization that meets their politics. So this is a strong opportunity, not only for Zohran Mamdani to be the Democratic Socialist mayor of New York City, but also to use an electoral campaign as a way to build this mass movement. And, you know, we touched on it way at the beginning, but, you know, DSA is functionally and legally not a political party. However, you know, we certainly can act like one. We can run candidates independently if we're able to. We can, in a state like New York, run them candidates on the Democratic Party line if we have to, but we also are very open and honest about critiquing the problems of the Democratic Party as much as we are fighting the right. So there's been a lot of excitement that no matter what ballot line we're taking, we are growing people's consciousness and saying, look at what this person is fighting for, look at what they believe in. You can fight for that with us and in conjunction with so many of our other campaigns that we run. So that's not just in Buffalo DSA, but that is in any DSA chapter you can find running an electoral campaign. There are so many other campaigns working in tandem to create this whole movement. And that's what's so exciting for me about what's happening in New York City.
Yeah, and I think that's really exciting, that it's almost more exciting that you aren't a political party necessarily, because it seems like you can move a little bit more freely in the way that you're pushing candidates on either side, right? And just the way that you're able to then navigate even the Democratic Party ticket. Like I just have loved Zohran Mamdani's campaign and the way that he's gone about even like winning that primary seat, you know. It just, and obviously New York City, it can be argued it's like a more progressive city, so it was like easier for him to do something like that. But I think to Alok's point, like we are at a juncture where people are like, what the hell are the Democrats even doing? Like, what are we doing here? And I think people do have the appetite for a really stark differentiation and other option, like just something else. Stop doing the same thing. Like, let's just do something else. And you guys are kind of able to encompass a large umbrella of people, to your point, that have been disaffected, that have a lot of different ideas of how they should be implemented or what we should be doing. But at least that's being heard, and you're an accountability tool to candidates or people that are able to enact some of those policy ideas, to kind of hold their feet to the fire, like, hey, do this. Because even for Zohran, I've seen, like, we're waiting for him to say something that we don't just agree with so that we can, hey, we're going to check you for a minute here, like, make sure you're not doing this or that. I saw, like, on X, I still say Twitter usually, but anyway, that people, you know, he was just out there with Hochul for whatever reason or whatever. And some people were a little cynical, like, oh, here we go. He's going to, like, sell out. He's going to be like an Obama. We're going to have hope and then whatever. But I really do feel like, because of I think he's a very principled person. It's not necessarily the same thing. But I think because of just the very nature of your member organization and association, it has a little bit of a louder, clearer, and more, I'm trying to figure out the word. I don't know if uncensored is the word, but just like a voice that has no, you know, affiliations where you have to be like, oh, we can't say this right now. We can say this. So I think that's really exciting. Like I just find it very exciting, and I wanted viewers to know that something like this exists, where they can go like discuss different alternative ideas that are more worker community centered. And it's a mechanism in which those ideas then can be kind of brought up the pole to people that can actually enact those changes.
And we should mention, obviously, that DSA is fully funded by its member dues, right? We don't take outside money. We decide everything democratically at our general body meetings. If there's a decision to be made, we do it with a vote. And people get to say their piece, we get to debate it, and we get to vote on it. And oftentimes we find people are kind of shocked at that, right? Because anytime they've tried to be involved in politics in the past, it's, you know, a few party leaders who are dictating the course of whatever's happening, right? And it's go here, do this, knock on some doors for us. And, you know, if you're a good team player, maybe we'll do something for you later. But in DSA, we encourage people to, you know, form their own campaigns, like bring it to our general body and say, this is what I want to do. Can I get the support needed to do this? And then we decide as a group if we can or not, right? Which I think is one of the greatest parts of DSA, personally.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I thank you both for coming on the show so much today. Like, I feel like we could talk about so much more in the future and all of those things. So maybe on a future episode. But Buffalo DSA, they have interest meetings. They have general body meetings. They have a lot of stuff on their Instagram and their website. So I'm going to make sure to link that on all of the media that you see around this episode, so that you can learn more if you're interested, if this piqued your curiosity, if you've been disaffected, if you feel like who's doing something different, check out Buffalo DSA. You never know how that might go. And it's open to everyone. There are dues, but I just want to point out on their website that they don't turn people away if there are like funding needs or anything that you can't afford to do. So still check it out anyway. Even if you feel like maybe I can't afford that right now, we understand the times we're in. As we speak, there's going to be no food stamps by Saturday of this week. So we know what world we're living in right now. But I just thank you so much for coming, because it is a crazy time. And I think this election season has been really interesting because people have really had an appetite, to both of your point, for something different. And I really wanted to just talk to local members that are a part of that something different. And if you leave comments, like, subscribe, you have some thoughts about democratic socialism, what you thought it was, what you learned here today, make sure you comment. We want to make sure other people are seeing our content here on The Public Good. And I thank you so much for joining us. This has been Dejia James with Partnership for the Public Good, or PPG, uniting over 380 organizations to make a better Western New York region. We will see you again next time. Thank you.